Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're decoding the hidden architecture of your daily routines using the absolute latest in neuroscience and psychology. If you've ever found yourself wondering, why do I keep doing that? And more importantly, how to actually change it? Well, you're in exactly the right place. Let's get right into it.
So, let's kick things off with a question I know we've all asked ourselves, probably right around mid-January after a New Year's resolution completely falls apart. Why is it so incredibly hard to break a bad habit? We start out with the best intentions, right? We map out our goals, yet somehow we end up right back at square one. Today, we're going to look at the hard science behind why that happens and figure out how to finally break that frustrating cycle.
Here's our roadmap for this explainer. We'll start with your brain on autopilot, move into the anatomy of a habit, explore the golden rule of change, look at the power of keystone habits, and finally, wrap up with taking back control.
All right, jumping right into part one, your brain on autopilot. Let's start at the very biological foundation of what's happening inside your head. There's this absolutely fascinating concept called chunking. It was discovered by MIT neuroscientist Anne Graybiel. While her team was studying a deeper, more primitive part of the brain called the basal ganglia, they found that our brains naturally group complex sequences of actions into one single automatic routine. Think about backing your car out of a driveway. The very first time you did it, it took intense white-knuckle concentration, right? But now, your brain just chunks all those little steps into one seamless, unthinking action.
And this brings us to a huge realization. Our habits aren't some sort of personal failure or lack of willpower. They're actually an evolutionary feature designed to save cognitive energy. As Dr. Graybiel points out, the real value of a habit is that you just don't have to think about it. If you had to consciously focus on every single step of tying your shoes or making your morning coffee, well, you'd never have the mental bandwidth left over to invent or create or solve complex problems. Habits are literally your brain's ultimate efficiency hack.
So mechanically, how does this work? It turns out that once a behavior becomes automatic, your prefrontal cortex, which is basically your brain's executive command center, essentially goes into a sleep-like state. It just hands over the reins to deeper, more primitive regions like the basal ganglia, which stores those chunked routines. Meanwhile, your hippocampus maps out the context to look for familiar cues, and your amygdala ties the whole experience to an emotional feeling. This division of labor perfectly explains why you can drive all the way to work and barely remember a single second of the commute.
Which leads us perfectly into Section 2, the anatomy of a habit. Let's look at how this biology translates into our daily actions.
You've probably heard of this three-step loop. It was popularized by the journalist Charles Duhigg, and it's the fundamental sequence governing literally every single habit in our lives. Step 1, you have a cue, a trigger in your environment. Step 2 is the routine. That's the actual physical, mental, or emotional behavior you perform. And Step 3 is the reward, the payoff. That reward is what tells your basal ganglia, hey, this loop felt great, let's definitely remember this for next time.
But here's the really crucial insight. The thing that makes habits so sticky. Dopamine-driven cravings are the actual engines powering this entire loop. Neuroscience shows us that once a habit is fully baked in, your brain doesn't actually wait for the reward to release dopamine. No, it releases it the very second you see the cue. That anticipation creates a massive craving, making the routine feel totally automatic and incredibly difficult to resist.
Moving right along to Section 3, the golden rule of change. Now that we know how the loop works, how do we hack it?
The golden rule of habit change is profoundly empowering. Why? Because it tells us we don't have to battle our cravings directly. I mean, let's face it, battling cravings usually ends in defeat anyway, right? Instead, the rule says you cannot extinguish a bad habit, you can only change it. How? By keeping the exact same cue and providing the exact same reward, but inserting a totally new routine right in the middle.
A great example of this is Duhigg's own personal A/B test. He had this terrible habit of going to the cafeteria to eat a cookie every single day at 3:30 p.m. By experimenting, he realized his underlying craving wasn't actually for sugar. Actually, scratch that. It was for a break and some social connection. So he kept the cue, 3:30 p.m., and the reward, socializing, but he simply swapped the routine. Instead of eating a cookie, he'd walk over and chat with a friend. He satisfied the craving and completely rewired the habit loop without relying on raw willpower.
This exact same principle applies on a much larger, more serious scale, too. It's why organizations like Alcoholics Anonymous have achieved such brilliant success. They don't try to eliminate the cue, which is often stress or a need for emotional release. Instead, they substitute the destructive routine of drinking with a new routine, going to a meeting or talking with a sponsor. This delivers the exact same reward, relief from anxiety. Plus, they add a really vital catalyst to the mix, the core belief that change is possible, which is massively reinforced by community support.
All right, let's zoom out a bit for Section 4, the power of keystone habits.
A keystone habit is basically a small change that triggers a massive domino effect of positive changes in totally unrelated areas of your life. And these are a huge relief, because they prove that success absolutely doesn't depend on getting everything right all at once. You don't have to fix your whole life in a day. Instead, it's about finding just a few key priorities that act as super powerful levers. You change one foundational thing, and it shifts your whole self-image, creating a cascade of small wins. Just look at this staggering number, $27 billion. That represents the massive increase in the aluminum giant Alcoa's market capitalization after CEO Paul O'Neill took over. And get this, when he stepped in, he didn't focus the company on profit margins or efficiency. No, he focused the entire massive organization on just one single keystone habit: worker safety. By relentlessly optimizing the habit loops around reporting and preventing injuries, something crazy happened. Communication naturally improved, quality control skyrocketed, and it transformed the entire corporate culture, ultimately leading to record-breaking profits.
Taking that back to an individual level, establishing just one of these keystone habits can secretly trigger a whole cascade of improvements for you. Research shows that people who start a routine of regular exercise naturally begin eating better and even using their credit cards less. People who start meditating often become better listeners and build emotional resilience. Or take daily journaling. It naturally boosts self-awareness and drives goal achievement. You really don't have to overhaul your entire life. You just pick one foundational pillar, focus on that, and watch the other dominoes fall.
And that brings us to our final section, Part 5, Taking Back Control. How do we actually apply all of this starting today? Cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, provides a phenomenal framework for this with the ABC model: activating event, belief, and consequence. It shows that changing our underlying beliefs about a cue completely dictates what happens next. Think about it. If your activating event is your alarm clock ringing, and your belief is, I'm way too tired to run, the consequence is pretty obvious. You hit snooze. But if you actively reframe that belief to, running right now will give me the energy I need to crush today, the consequence changes entirely. These 6 CBT-based steps, identifying the habit, reframing beliefs, setting goals, planning cues, monitoring progress, and adjusting, they give you a totally concrete, science-backed toolkit. It's about deliberately constructing new routines and dismantling the ones holding you back. It's not about blind willpower anymore. It's about treating yourself like a science experiment. You analyze your specific cues, you plan your new routines ahead of time, and you track your progress to see what actually satisfies your unique cravings.
And speaking of willpower, we need to remember that willpower is actually the single most important keystone habit of all. It is not a fixed genetic trait that you either have or you don't. It's a learnable skill. It's a muscle. Yes, it fatigues with heavy use during the day, but it grows stronger with regular practice over time. Studies show that when people practice self-control in super small areas, like just consciously maintaining good posture, their overall willpower endurance actually increases across the board. The more you use it, the stronger it gets.
If you ever feel totally stuck, remember this concept, the prefrontal override. Even though old habits feel incredibly deeply ingrained, MIT optogenetic research confirms that your prefrontal cortex retains moment-by-moment control to switch habits on or off. Using light to control brain cells in lab tests, scientists proved that your brain's executive center acts like an emergency brake. No matter how old or powerful a habit loop might feel, your conscious mind always possesses the physical capability to step in and say, stop. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final thought to spark your journey toward taking back the controls of your own mind. Take a hard look at your daily routines. What is the one keystone habit you will choose to change today that could transform everything else tomorrow? You now have the neurological blueprint and you have the psychological tools. Now, it's just about choosing the right lever to pull.